Hello, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 3 of Solarpunk Presents. This is Christina, and in this episode, I'll be talking to transdisciplinary technologist Stephen Reid about Solarpunk, Lunarpunk, crypto, and Web3. Don't forget to support us on Patreon and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Before we dive into this episode, we would like to issue a short disclaimer. Ariel and I, and this podcast, do not support cryptocurrencies or Web3, nor do we wish to seem to support them, nor to actually provide them any support.
This podcast is about inquiry into what various people associated with or adjacent to the solarpunk movement, and making the world better in general, are doing and thinking. Just because we cover certain topics does not mean that we endorse them.
In this interview, I did not do a great job of providing context, and I didn't forcefully challenge our guest on his advocacy of crypto and Web3. Nor did I push back against the appropriation of Lunarpunk as a vehicle for pushing crypto and Web3. These were rookie errors on my part in this interview, where I was trying to learn how anyone could think crypto and Web3 are good things.
This interview came from a place of good faith. The reality is that a lot of people are inspired by these new technologies as a way to make things more equitable or address climate change, or basically to bring about the solarpunk future that we're all looking towards. They are subjects worth talking about, especially for the sake of those people who may not be so technologically savvy and thus more likely to be drawn in by those who would seek to exploit them. Not talking about something does not just make it go away. However, we neglected to add critical context, and that is on us.
So we just want to point out here that while aspects of cryptocurrencies and blockchain have utopian and anarchistic roots, intending to free us from the potentially harmful oversight of banks and governments, they've become tools that are far more dystopian. Cryptocurrencies quickly turned into financial instruments that are used by investors and criminals strictly to make money, to launder money, to scam people, to victimize people, and to commit fraud in ways that states are largely inequipped to prevent and fairly legally incapable of mitigating. Meanwhile, blockchain technologies, including crypto, are totally environmentally unsustainable, requiring eye-watering amounts of electricity and resources that have to be mined out of the ground. So we remain unconvinced that crypto and Web3 are in any way solarpunk, or really even Lunarpunk, solutions to, whatever problems it is they're supposed to be solving.
For a much better and far more thorough discussion of the hype and the pitfalls and dangers of crypto and Web3, we recommend the YouTube videos The Line Goes Up, The Problem with NFTs, and Web 3.0, A Libertarian Dystopia. The website web3isgoinggreat.com is also an excellent resource.
And now, here's the episode. Hi, Stephen, and welcome to our podcast, where we explore solarpunk and solarpunk-adjacent thoughts, projects, topics, and happenings in the present day. Recently, we dipped our toes into Lunarpunk, namely, what is it and how is it related to solarpunk? One of our supporters suggested that you have a lot of thoughts on this topic, which you have shared in your Lunarpunk Dreams podcast. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today about Lunarpunk and what it has to do with solarpunk, crypto, and Web3.
Hi, Christina, and thanks so much for having me on the Solarpunk Presents podcast. So yeah, my name's Stephen. I describe myself as a technologist, facilitator, and coach. Just a brief history. I studied physics and complexity sciences, so I have quite a technical background. I then went into activism, first climate activism with a group called Climate Camp in the UK, and then moved into the area of anti-austerity activism when what is still the current UK government came into power in 2010, and I had this idea to massively cut public services. We started a campaign on tax avoidance and evasion, saying before you cut public services, should you not be collecting tax from these rich corporations and individuals in some cases. A few years after that, got very passionate about psychedelics and the role that psychedelics could have in transforming society. Activism had been an expression or an exploration and investigation into kind of outer change, and psychedelics was my first stop on this journey of inner change. I started an organization called the Psychedelic Society, which was originally campaigning for the legal regulation of psychedelics in the UK, but quite quickly moved into becoming much more about events and arts and culture around psychedelics, and that organization continues to flourish and is running 30 or 40 events a month on psychedelics and other altered states of consciousness more broadly. The last few years, I've kind of come back to my technical roots, and I've been teaching courses on Web3, and more recently, even than that, AI, artificial intelligence. And I've also trained as a coach, so also, yeah, enjoy working one-on-one with people on their hopes and their dreams.
That is quite a path, a meandering path through life. But let me ask you about Solarpunk, because there are as many ideas of Solarpunk as there are people who know what Solarpunk is. Do you have your own personal definition of Solarpunk?
Yeah, it's a vision of a future where technology and nature are coexisting in harmony. It's a future that's regenerative and sustainable. I'd say it's not necessarily high tech. More for me, it's about appropriate technology, which could mean certain areas of life are actually lower tech and lower power than they are now. We've harnessed technology as a means to enhance life, to foster deep connections amongst people, to heal our planet, not simply pursuing technology as an end in itself, which so often seems to be the case in our current society, current economy. I think of a solarpunk future where technological advancements are guided by ethics, by empathy, by a profound respect for all forms of life, recognizing that we've got a lot of healing to do. We haven't been good stewards of this planet for the past few thousand years, and it's time for that to change. I like this idea of solarpunk as a verb, like solarpunking. Like that for me, solarpunk is all about like DIY culture, participatory culture, co-creation. I've had some very important experiences at the European Burning Man events, Borderland and Nowhere, though I've never been to Burning Man itself. And those have been some of the most solar punky spaces that I've had the pleasure to spend time in, I would say. And the participatory culture element of that is a big reason. And there's the punk piece as well. I think of solarpunk as being something inherently anti-authoritarian or left libertarian, post-capitalist. That it's something that's skeptical of markets and centralization, has a tendency towards decentralization, decentralized systems. It's a kind of counter narrative, a counter imaginary to the dystopian views that so often dominate our current collective imagination and much of kind of popular sci-fi.
I really like your vision of Solarpunk. And I'm embarrassed to say I have never even heard of these European Burning Man festivals. Where are they?
So Nowhere is in Spain, the desert kind of north west of Barcelona, and the Borderland has been either in Sweden or Denmark. It's now moved back to Sweden. And so that Nowhere has this kind of Southern European kind of fire energy to it, and Borderland has this kind of like cool Scandinavian, like kind of water lunar energy to it.
Oh wow, that must be fun, actually. Yeah. And do they and then the sun never sets at that, or nearly never sets it in
Right,
summertime,
exactly. When you're at the Borderland for sure, that's the case.
which adds a whole other dimension. One thing about your description of Solarpunk is that to an outsider, it could sound a little bit, yeah, it's obviously very utopian, but perhaps also a little bit overly optimistic, maybe even naive. Do you think as a movement, Solarpunk has some pretty serious blind spots?
Well, I think there are elements of the solarpunk movement that are naively optimistic, perhaps not political enough. I mean, kind of lacking some analysis of capital and power and privacy as another topic, which maybe we'll come on to later. I think some visions of solarpunk are still quite high tech and and that there might be some naivety in that. Like it's possible in the future, we're heading towards, we're actually going to have very restricted access to power and to materials. Yeah, the kind of thing that invites some meditation on appropriate technology rather than simply assuming that we're going to have access to high technology. Yeah, I think there's some interesting conversations to be had around, Solarpunk for who? Like, what is the vision of Solarpunk such that it's accessible to all 7, 8, 10 billion people on the planet over the next generations, rather than just being, Solarpunk for the 1% in Silicon Valley who also sometimes like posting, Solarpunk memes nowadays. But I sense that they don't pay much attention, don't care much for the kind of inclusive aspect to it, which I think is vital.
What separates Solarpunk for me from just a general hippie movement is the tech aspect, but there isn't a lot of quantitative thinking, I feel like, that goes on in Solarpunk.
Yeah, I've been listening to some pretty harrowing stuff suggesting that or just laying out the challenges of a transition to renewables, saying like there's it's yes, there are challenges in kind of getting off fossil fuels and countering the power of the fossil fuel industry, but there are a whole load of challenges, both in the kind of manufacture of renewables at the scale that are necessary to even power our current levels of energy consumption, not to mention future consumption. There's every possibility that the future we're heading into is going to actually be significantly lower power. So yeah, some important conversations to be had there for sure.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but also, I mean, also just overcoming the social objections. And we're seeing that right now here in Germany, where the Green Party has been kind of trying to push through this transition to green energy and using heat pumps instead of oil burners and all of this kind of stuff. And the country's going into meltdown. Everyone wants to vote for the far right, and the farmers are protesting on the streets, and it's concerning, I have to admit.
I think that points to the way in which Solarpunk, and I would say maybe especially Lunarpunk, is actually about like a change in culture and change in values, such that people become content with living like lower power and much more fulfilling lifestyles. It's not simply about the sort of the tech side of things, and that's what makes Solarpunk kind of interesting to me in a way. Like it's this post-capitalist aspect rather than it's simply futuristic nature.
I was just thinking of a paper I read, oh God, ages ago, a decade ago or so, looking at sort of the intersection between energy and history. And if you look at the evolution, kind of I don't know if it's the evolution of societies or how you would want to talk about it, but the more powerful ones always do better or take over at the expense of the lower power societies. So it is kind of a frightening thought for a country to say, okay, we're going to power down a bit here, because you really are kind of putting yourself at the mercy of all of the other countries on the world stage.
I understand this in its most general sense as the so-called multipolar trap, of which things like a race to the bottom or an arms race or a tragedy of the commons are all kind of manifestations of this pattern of a multipolar trap, which has this feature that like, well, we don't want to do it, but if they're doing it, then we have to do it, or otherwise, we're going to be screwed. Like for an arms race, no one really wants to engage in an arms race, but like if you see the other countries starting to produce nuclear weapons, then you're like reluctantly have to say, well, we better do it too, because otherwise, they're just going to nuke us. And that actually doesn't have to apply to nukes; it applies to any level of technology. So this is a really core problem. Sometimes people speak about it nowadays in terms of Moloch, the so-called god of coordination failure,
Okay.
the kind of like god of arms races, or like kind of dark god of arms races and so on. This is a really important thing to keep in mind. Like how exactly are we going to deal with the problem of multipolar traps moving into this lower power or solarpunk future?
And I guess we're seeing it right now with AI as well, because you can
Yes.
do anything you want to regulate it within the physical boundaries of your own country, but that doesn't stop the rest of the world from developing it further or using it in warfare or
it seems possible that some companies, including Google, Microsoft, have been sitting on quite powerful AI technology for some time, and there was a kind of informal agreement to not make it public. And then OpenAI came along, ironically, because they were supposed to be the organization that was going to keep the others in check, and they kind of fired the starting gun by releasing ChatGPT. And now, all of the big players are like, well, if they're going to do it, then, we might as well do it, because otherwise, we're going to go out of business, basically, if it does prove to be a very successful technology. And the indications are that it's going to be successful or profitable for some of these companies, at least. So, yeah, absolutely. It seems like we've entered into a kind of AI arms race of sorts, the consequences of which are extremely unpredictable at this point, but we could say are unlikely to end well without some real care and thought.
Sometimes I think that Solarpunk, in its kind of relentless quest for positivity and optimism, is perhaps missing some critical practical aspects. So I was reading a little bit about Lunarpunk and its relation to Web3 and to crypto, which was a different way than I had seen Lunarpunk before. And I was wondering if maybe this is where Lunarpunk kind of steps in and provides more of these answers to some of the privacy questions and actually to some of the tech questions that Solarpunk isn't necessarily answering.
I first became kind of aware of Lunarpunk in the Web3 context, but I've always had an intuition that it's wants to be about something much broader than just Web3. So I wrote a blog piece, The Seven Darknesses of Lunarpunk, attempting to kind of broaden its scope somewhat, mainly for kind of Web3 audience. And I'd say in its most kind of general form, it emphasizes aspects of the human experience and technological interaction that are often overlooked or undervalued in these brighter, more utopian visions of Solarpunk. And it's about embracing the entirety of the human condition, including those parts we might prefer to keep hidden or we might view as less ideal. So it acknowledges the value or the importance of things like darkness, privacy, anonymity, the unconscious, the taboo, sees them as actually vital components to consider deeply if we do want this holistic approach to a regenerative future. Some of those things are not always headlined in Solarpunk, are they? Where there can be this this quest for positivity, good vibes only. Yeah, my sense is that Solarpunk can sometimes risk overlooking the complexities and the darker aspects of human or current ecological realities. So yes, this piece around privacy and anonymity that the kind of Web3 folks have kind of particularly latched onto. But yeah, as I said, I think it is about more than that. Sometimes people talk about it as Solarpunk as the kind of lunar or like shadow complement to Solarpunk. More recently, a prominent author in the space at an organization called DarkFi has said that she's thinking about it more as like the kind of combination of Lunarpunk as the combination of Solarpunk and cypherpunk. Those two ways of thinking about it are not, I think, are both useful and not necessarily incompatible.
Let me butt in to say that, listeners, in case you're not familiar with them, cypherpunks aim for social and political change through the use of cryptography and other privacy-enhancing technologies. Cypherpunks have been responsible for developments such as Tor and PGP. The prime example of cypherpunk fiction is Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, which is a fun book. You should check it out if you haven't already. Just thinking about the privacy issues, as you mentioned, you're living in a Scandinavian country where there is very little privacy compared to, say, the UK, right? There's this idea that your neighbors should be able to see what you're doing at all times, and your address is publicly available in a database for anyone to find. People can find how much taxes you pay or how much you earn at your job, all very easily because it's a very transparent society. How do you feel about that?
I have quite mixed feelings. On one hand, the idea that we all could just like live in a fully transparent society and like look up at each other's most intimate details on whether it's home addresses or bank balances or whatever is very attractive to me. But the the danger in a way is like that, that's great until it isn't. It's like it's great if you've got some kind of compassionate, caring, wise government or system of governance. But what happens if and possibly when you have a bad actor that then ends up in control of that apparatus, and then suddenly has it quickly turns into a kind of authoritarian dystopia. So the kind of the key reason why I think some Lunarpunk ideas around privacy and anonymity and so on are really important. Like it's what Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, has called defensive or decentralized accelerationism. The accelerationist part refers to kind of having some optimism about technology and desiring a higher technology future, but not forgetting to put emphasis on so-called defensive or decentralized technologies. Hopefully we never need them in a way, but like it's really important that they are there in the case that the reins of power are taken by people that we prefer not to be holding them. And actually, I mean, I'd say there's another piece to it in a way is, I wish it were that easy, but the fact is, more and more it seems that we are living in not even a kind of a capitalist economy, but a techno-feudal economy, if you're familiar with this language, by the economist Yanis Varoufakis, where a huge part of our lives and certainly economic lives are controlled by big tech. Yeah, some of the technologies that Lunarpunks are interested in have some agreement with cypherpunks on these kind of topics are technologies that allow us to take back our data, take back our identities from big tech and ensure that they can't be co-opted or monetized again.
Or used to manipulate us into voting for people we shouldn't be voting for instance.
Indeed, yeah.
Or things like that. I was reading in the paper here that I can't remember if it's Denmark or Sweden, I think it's Sweden, has actually been having problems with gangland executions because addresses are freely available on the internet. You don't even have to phone anyone to get them anymore, right? There's like literally no barrier. You just have to click your mouse and type a name in and you can get their address.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also been some stories, because I think tax returns are public here. I'm still figuring this all out, but people looking up tax returns of people that have invested in cryptocurrency and then going around to their house and kind of holding them hostage until they hand over their private keys. Whilst in a traditional banking system, the bank would probably be able to block or reverse the transaction. Like by design, cryptocurrency transactions, cannot be stopped or reversed. So, a strange new world that we head in when you combine the kind of traditional, very admirable, noble values of transparency that exist in Scandinavian society with phenomena, like kind of gangland and crypto phenomena. So we're all working this out. But I think it's very instructive for solarpunks that might be like, well, it's great, everything's just going to be transparent, and it's going to be wonderful to be to look at some of the failure modes of that way of doing things.
Shadows can be concealing for good and for bad. Let me make a little divergence here, and let me ask you about Web3, because I am not as familiar with it as I should be. How would you describe Web3?
As the system of programming smart contracts that has been built on top of blockchain technology. So the first cryptocurrency running on the first blockchain was Bitcoin. Bitcoin was largely still is like a very dumb technology. It's basically just a very simple ledger that doesn't allow for very much more than simply kind of like shuffling numbers around, like, how many coins do you have, how many coins do I have, and so on. But then starting with Ethereum, more modern cryptocurrencies have this system of smart contracts, which are essentially just small computer programs that can run on blockchains. But that it turned out to be an enormously powerful idea, and the Ethereum community and other community Web3 communities are making really quite good progress on like reinventing the existing financial system without middlemen, like just as systems of smart contracts. for me, that's definitely only the starting point. Like there's lots that's wrong with the current financial system. So the idea that all we need to do is simply rebuild it using a system of smart contracts is I think clearly not true. However, I think it's it's an interesting start to cut out the middlemen, and then but the more interesting piece for me is then how we could or how we can use Web3 technology to experiment with very different kinds of economic system, perhaps that involve demurrage, like money that decays, or things like universal basic income. Many ideas that people have had and often campaign or petition state actors to try out. What I love about Web3, it's like, well, we don't have to just be banging our head against the brick wall of of the UK Treasury or the sort of like the kind of economic ministries in whichever country folks are here. But we can just get on and start building these new economic experiments and finding out what works, like on blockchains, on Web3 enabled blockchains, and I find that enormously freeing and exciting.
So by middlemen, you mean banks, or you mean brokers, or you mean
Sure.
or
Yeah,
all of the above?
exactly. Yeah, basically the whole of the like finance world is gradually being replaced by smart contracts. Or I mean, not in terms of the volume of trade yet, but in terms of the functionality. It goes along with what we're seeing actually with the application of AI, to name a different technology that is separate to Web3. In some ways, they are starting to converge. I think this can be very, very interesting to see like what AI is going to do to the jobs market. And at least in the UK, we're seeing like our supermarket checkouts being kind of replaced by computers. And maybe there was this assumption that that kind of technology is going to take blue collar jobs. But actually what seems like it's going to happen is that it's a few blue collar jobs, and now it's going to take a whole load of white collar jobs and really quite well paid jobs, things, in the medical sciences and the arts and so on. Now, I'm not saying I'm necessarily happy about that, but like it's like seems like the way things are probably going to go over the next 5 to 10 years now. And I think similarly there's a real possibility that could happen in the financial world as a consequence of AI, but also Web3. That means that you don't need offices of thousands of brokers sitting there to facilitate trades, when you just need to write a computer program that essentially synthesizes the core functions of what they're doing, and then that computer program will run on a decentralized blockchain 24/7 at a significantly lower cost. To the extent to which these middlemen are essentially parasitic or vampiric, taking their share of each transaction of real economic activity between buyers and sellers, I think that's no bad thing to kind of like cut many of those folks out. But again, like that's the starting point for me. I'm hopeful that we can go much, much further, that that blockchains in time will be used for really radical economic experiments beyond simply cutting out the middlemen.
So I have to ask a really basic question. What is a smart contract?
So yeah, smart contract is basically just a small computer program that runs on a blockchain. And what is a blockchain? Or in this context, I guess you could say it's a network of computers, a decentralized network of computers, very often geographically widely distributed, that are checking each other's calculations and proposals to the network. And there's some consensus mechanism to ensure that the current state of the chain, the state of the blockchain, always remains synchronized between these different computers, that no one computer or set of computers can cheat things and claim to have come up with a different result to some program that run, or claim that someone has more tokens or more coins than they should have. And different blockchains have different consensus mechanisms and consensus requirements, but in the typical case, as long as 51% of the computers, of the nodes in that network are honest, or are then the blockchain maintains its integrity. So it's just not that it's impossible to corrupt, but it typically is well, apart from anything else, very, very expensive to corrupt. the most common reason for someone to try to kind of corrupt or attack a blockchain would be to try to steal tokens for themselves. But they did successfully steal a load of coins for themselves. But then people realized that was the consequence of a 51% attack. Then the value of those coins would probably basically go to zero because the chain would no longer be trustworthy. So there's this very clever kind of economic argument there for blockchains being secure and being safe, like there being a kind of disincentive for people to, whilst it's technically possible to kind of take over the chain, like you wouldn't want to do it because actually it would end up being no economic benefit. Different chains have different levels of decentralization. This is a topic that certainly would interest or should interest Solarpunks and Lunarpunks, like how genuinely decentralized is that network? Because if it ain't, then we aren't doing much more than than one of the big banks.
It's an interesting combination of transparency and privacy.
Tell me more.
Simply because what's going on in the blockchain is transparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yet the people connected to each one of those things is, in principle, is private.
Yeah, well, I think that I would say I would use the word anonymous or pseudonymous, actually. Yeah, and so there's some really good Lunarpunk discourse teasing out the difference between privacy and anonymity that I think is really valuable for them. Some folks listening to this might want to kind of go and dig into more. Most of the big block, the Ethereum blockchain, for example, we'd say they're not private. Maybe we would counterpose mostly with transparent. Say no, they are transparent. Everyone has access to this full view of all the transactions. So like the ledger is public. However, the receiving address of any transaction or the kind of person that requests for a smart contract to be run is simply a string of numbers and letters. It is anonymous, pseudonymous in that sense. Many states around the world are now insisting that people tie, government ID to these strings of numbers and letters, so that these states can have visibility over which actual citizens are performing which activities. And that also is going to be a very interesting area in the years to come. To what extent a state's going to be successful in de-anonymizing blockchains? And to what extent will there be an insistence from citizens that no, this is that there should be a right to anonymity, a right to transact in an anonymous or pseudonymous way using this technology? It
is a little tricky, right? Before, if you wanted to do something shady or you wanted to do something you didn't have to pay taxes on, at least you had cash. But now with so many things going electronic, then that's conventionally is much easier to trace. But yeah, I mean, governments must hate this, because it's harder to collect taxes on this kind of stuff because you have to rely on everyone self-reporting their transactions. But also, it opens up a lot of room for money laundering.
That almost in an ideal world, like no one would be interested in cryptocurrency or need to be using this technology. I consider it like fundamentally a defensive technology that exists to check the power of states, in particular kind of authoritarian states. When I look out at the world today, I'm glad this technology exists. And if we get to a point such that we all have like sufficient trust in states and in the powers that be, such that we don't need this technology, then great. But that's not how I feel right now, and that's really that teases out maybe a kind of a difference in a flavor between Solarpunk and Lunarpunk. Solarpunk has this kind of naively optimistic of let's just make everything transparent and then kind of like hand over our data to the state and so on, and Lunarpunk say hang on a minute, like that's again like that's fine until it's not. What are our backups here, or like what are our insurance policies against some kind of authoritarian takeover of systems that may have been created with good intent? It's not about the intent with which they're created. It's about just like being mindful about how these things can go wrong. Sometimes that's what Solarpunk is lacking. For something that dreams of utopia and
our thoughts on utopia have generally been that it tends to be ultimately dystopian or authoritarian, with all the individuals giving up their individuality to, for the collective good. So it's interesting that solar punks are like, oh, it'll just be fine.
Mm.
And we don't need to worry about how we stop it from not being, not going bad. But you mentioned something interesting that again, so I'm a newbie in these areas, so I don't know much about them. Money that evaporates?
Money that evaporated. I think that
Or
was probably
loses value, or
okay, demurrage. Yeah, this is a very old economic idea actually. Like it was first written about a couple of 100 years ago, I think. But the idea of money that actually decays in value. So it was originally imagined to work with paper money, such that if you wanted to maintain, say you have a dollar, if you want to maintain the value of that dollar each year, you have to buy a stamp that's worth 10 cents, say. So essentially the value of that dollar is kind of like decaying or declining by 10 cents a year. You can imagine a kind of electronic equivalent. In some ways, it's similar to a negative interest rate, which we did actually see in the Eurozone, in some parts of the Eurozone not so long ago. But yeah, rather than this assumption that you have money in your account and you know it's going to go up in value over time, it's like any stash of money actually is going to decay in value over time. And what this does is this creates an incentive to get out and spend it rather than hoard it. It's a disincentive to hoarding it. And intuitively, it feels like very interesting to me, the way in which it disincentivizes hoarding, but just it feels more aligned with nature and the natural world. You know, everything in nature decays. In that you can't there's nothing that you can store forever. Everything wants to be every waste is an input for something else. Everything wants to remain in flow and in some kind of ecosystemic relationship. And I wonder how it'd be to think about money in the same way and to align it with with how we see the natural world working.
I mean, it's sort of like inflation, and yet it isn't inflation. But I imagine that the people who tend to collect a lot of money would find ways around it by holding people's debt.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure, it's a complicated topic, but it's I think it's a good example of the kind of radical economic experiments I would like to see happening on blockchains. Like rather than just this assumption that if you've got a bunch of money, it's it's going to kind of stay there or kind of become a little bit greater each year. Like how would it be? And this would have to start off as as experiments, probably just amongst initially quite small groups of people. 10, then 100, then 1,000. Like, how is it when people opt in to new economic systems with radically different rules that, on the face of it, might not be as beneficial or as much in the interest of individuals, but as a whole, we might find they are radically beneficial to communities or societies or even whole countries. And I want to believe such mechanisms exist. Certainly the kind of the idea of the base unit of economics, and indeed like life itself being the individual, is actually a relatively modern one that's like went into like overdrive since the 1970s with neoliberal economics. But my understanding is for many indigenous communities, they're aware of the existence of the individual. It has a place in society, but it's really not like the primary unit. Like in many ways, the primary unit is some greater number, maybe it's like a pod of 6, or maybe it's even like the tribe of 150, and like that is really what life is about. And then in this sense, any sense of the individual kind of exists to support the flourishing of tribe or community as a whole. So can we use these technologies to actually really start radically rethinking the place of the individual and our different scales of belonging to one another? That sounds interesting to me.
Oh, that is a really totally different mindset, because we definitely don't think that way. I mean, even those of us who think, oh, I like community and da da da, we really don't think about the individual as being there to make the community a better place or to make the country a better country. That's really interesting. So let me just ask you a couple of sort of quick questions here. So is this where your psychedelics come in to help you kind of see things from different points of view?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, I wanted to, because we've been speaking quite a lot about the kind of outer expression of Lunarpunk in a way. I wanted to kind of come to the inner dimension more. So, yeah, I'd say there is a kind of spiritual, psychological dimension to Lunarpunk and to transformation, the kind of regenerative transformation that probably many solar punks desire. And I think that transformation often does require a deep dive into aspects of our inner experience that are often not so investigated. It's about acknowledging and integrating parts of ourselves that we might prefer to ignore or suppress, our fears, our desires, our pain. And I think there are a number, I've found a number of modalities that are extremely useful and to engage in this kind of explorations, which include psychedelics, meditation, psychotherapy, coaching, conscious sexuality work, and there's I think lunar punks recognize that there's a sense in which the external world is simply a manifestation of our inner condition. And if we think that we can change things just by being out there, and if we just build one more solar panel and like just one more eco village, and like then everything's going to be fine, then we're probably going to be disappointed. You know, like there's at least as much work to do inside as there is outside, and that I know that can sound challenging, you know, when we look out at the world and we think, but it's so urgent. It's so much work to do on the climate crisis and the wars that are happening and all the rest of it. And and so I get that position that and you know, people might say, well, you know, how can anyone have time to meditate or to, you know, engage in psychotherapy or psychedelic trips when the world is burning like this? And I say, actually, that's, you know, the best time, or precisely the time when we need to kind of spend at least some time turning inwards and just really taking stock of ourselves, and so that we can ensure that any action that we're then taking in the world is coming from the best place possible, the wisest place possible, that we're not simply kind of shuffling deck chairs or making things worse.
Yeah, or have tunnel vision because we're panicking.
Right.
So that's interesting. So that's also how we can maybe change our values by looking, yeah, not just into the mirror, but into our soul and saying, okay, what am I doing wrong? What are we doing wrong collectively? And what could we be doing better? And what do we need to address because of all the traumas in the past and all of the historical bad things that have happened, and in order to actually change for the better?
Well, and I'm curious if for your take on that, like what is the role of that kind of like inner work, inner transformation for in the solar punk setting? Is that often a sort of theme that you observe, that you feel is kind of recognized in the solar punk community?
I think there's a big call for social justice, but I don't know how much of it involves looking into the mirror and asking what's my part in that. I think there's a lot of anger directed towards the government or countries and or societies as a whole. I could be wrong about that.
No.
Um,
Yeah,
but it's
that broadly resonates what you said so far. Yeah, please carry on.
but I found it interesting. I've been here in Germany on and off for about the almost 20 years now. And what I found very interesting was learning about how much, in the decades after World War II, the society did look itself in the mirror and ask itself, how could we have done that? How
Mm,
could we have been such monsters? And how do we make sure that that never happens again? And up until quite recently, I was very impressed with the work that they had accomplished on that front. Okay, now the far right is rising and people are angry, and I'm like, okay, hey guys, what happened to the mirror, you know?
mm,
Um, but as I said, for quite a while, I was deeply impressed with the work that they had done, and I wish that my own country, the US, would
mm,
have done that, or would start to do that and really look into the mirror about slavery and about the way we treated the Native Americans, and really ask ourselves what did that do to ourselves,
yeah.
and what is that poison still doing to our society, and is that why we're so violent? Is that why we're so angry? Is that why we have so much racism? And maybe if we could just admit that we did these things and that they were bad, then we could
Yeah.
start to do the work to heal the society, to fix it, and to solve all of the things that make America a very difficult place to live unless you have a lot of money.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something really important there. Actually, there's a chap called Thomas Hubel, a German teacher, he's facilitator, who seems to be doing really important work on kind of collective trauma healing and reckoning. So I think, yeah, this kind of inner work, the kind of work you can do with therapy and meditation, psychedelics and so on. Sometimes it's focused more or more around our individual stories and kind of individual challenges that we might have experienced, and then other times, as you've just named, it can actually be to do with kind of collective challenges and collective experiences. And there's plenty to do in both of those, on both of those scales. And we absolutely can't forget them. In moving into this solarpunk future that we all hope to manifest. It's basically a meme at this point. The number of eco villages that go wrong because there's some fallout between the founders and so on. It's like, well, let's take that seriously. Why do you think your eco village, or is going to be any different? Like it's. I wasn't directed at you, so just
No. I was just thinking,
Yeah.
like wherever you go, there you are, right? There's no
Right.
escaping yourself, so you might as well at least understand what's wrong with you, I guess. I don't know. But it is hard to get along with other people. It's
It is.
there's so many.
And I think the kind of balance between solarpunk and lunarpunk. We don't want to get stuck in self-introspection and feel like, oh, I have to really perfect myself and like I iron out every crease before I can start putting up those solar panels. No, absolutely not. It's not saying like one is more important or should come completely before the other, but it's saying that both of these things have a role, have some importance here. I imagine most people will have a tendency more towards one or the other and might recognize, cool, I'm really someone who feels more comfortable with just being out there building things and making things happen. Or I'm someone that feels more comfortable sitting back and analyzing and introspecting. And the invitation in these challenging times, I would suggest, is to recognize where you are and to move into or towards your boundary, to move towards the area of discomfort in a way, whether that means taking more time for introspection or rolling up your sleeves and getting out there, realizing that you've done enough work for now, on yourself, and maybe the work needs to happen in the world.
Yeah, and I think it's also, one of the important things about Solarpunk is that, things should be done with joy.
Mm.
And so you also have to be a little bit at peace with yourself to have joy.
The concept of Lunarpunk has risen at this time, in various domains, whether that's in the Web3 domain or kind of through existing Solarpunk communities or elsewhere, for a reason, perhaps, that maybe it's just suggesting slight rebalancing or advising us that we don't forget some of these aspects of privacy, anonymity, taboo, the unconscious, even as we transform society towards regenerative ends.
So wow, so thank you for this talk. I have learned a lot, and you've left me feeling very optimistic.
Yeah, in many ways I'm optimistic too. I think there's no doubt we're living through an extremely significant time. One of the reasons I've been teaching courses on technology topics is because I think the more people that are can have intelligent opinions, educated opinions about these technologies, the better. Things like AI and Web3. If we just leave decisions on these technologies to the handful of folks in Silicon Valley, it's gonna turn out in a certain way. So yeah, a call for people to kind of to educate themselves on these emerging technologies. Like it's certainly not all good, but it's not going to get better by just sticking our heads in the sand.
No,
So
that's true.
skill up, have an opinion, and let's try to sort of bend some of these really very powerful emerging technologies in the right direction and towards solarpunk, lunarpunk ends in the generation ahead.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Wow, that was definitely informative. I hope you learned as much as I did. Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel Kroon and Christina De La Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Solarpunk Presents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay Solarpunk.